I'm delighted to introduce you to Josh Graham. Josh, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun to put together.
Yes, definitely. Um, we'll start off. The marimba has an interesting history to me. Can you discuss, before we start, just a little bit about its origins, dating all the way back to the 13th century, kind of to its placement in the modern orchestra in the 20th century?
Yeah, it's funny because percussion is both the oldest and newest instrument uh, in a lot of ways. You know, besides the human voice, percussion is the instrument that was probably first created. Um, so the marimba has origins in West Africa with instruments that kind of predate it, called the jill and the balafon. Um, And these instruments tend to be just kind of a single row of tuned wooden bars. Sometimes they were put over a pit that was dug in the ground. Sometimes they were made to rest over a bed of resonating gourds. Um, and that instrument migrated over to Central America with the slave trade. Um, so in Central America, the marimba kind of developed into the chromatic instrument that we see today. So instead of just having one row of keys, it started to have two rows of keys, um, like the piano does. So it became a chromatic instrument, having all 12 notes in the scale. Um, the relationship to the marimba in Central America is really fascinating. It's actually the national instrument of Guatemala, and it's also really popular in southern Mexico and in the state of Chiapas. And it's used in a lot of, you know, I have a friend from Guatemala, for example, who they had a marimba band at his wedding. It's that kind of instrument in that country. Um, and then it eventually kind of migrated into the United States and into Western music. It's one of the last instruments to have a concerto written for it. And for our Music 110 students out there, a concerto, hopefully you guys remember this, is a piece that has a soloist with an ensemble. So the first marimba concerto was written in 1940. So if we think about like the history of the piano or the violin, they'd had centuries and hundreds of years where they already had concerti written for their instruments. Um, so that first concerto was written by Paul Creston, um, who was a New York-based composer, and he wrote it for um, the premiere of this all-female orchestra to be premiered by this woman who was a pretty celebrated marimba soloist named Ruth Stuber-Jean. Um, and you know, it was kind of seen as a novelty instrument, like an instrument that was um, almost like, oh, that's cute, you know. and it took a while, really from 1940 onwards, for there to be real repertoire written for the instrument, um, and for it to be kind of considered a real solo vehicle. And now it's kind of considered the main solo instrument of a lot of percussionists. Um, there's a lot of other solo routes that percussionists can play, but the marimba has really built a kind of unique spot as a solo instrument for percussionists to perform on.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, I guess that kind of answers what is your personal appeal to the marimba, say, over other percussion instruments. I have to admit, when I walk by, if you're in your percussion room, you're usually playing around on the marimba. It seems to be the instrument of choice.
Totally. I mean, I kind of came to percussion a little bit late. Like I started playing drum set because my dad got a drum set when I was 8, so therefore I started to play the drum set. And I always liked drum set, but I wasn't like crazy passionate about it. And then when I started playing percussion, meaning like marimba and xylophone and snare drum and timpani, when I was about 16, that's when I really started to fall in love with the music for the instrument and just what it could do and just the sound of it. Um, so I mean, it's kind of my desert island instrument. Like if percussionists play a lot of things, but like if I could only play one instrument the rest of my life, it would definitely be marimba for me.
And for me personally, as someone with a composition background, one of the reasons I love percussion is, and maybe you could speak this a little bit, it seems like out of any group of instrumentalists, and may have to do with just because it's the time frame, being a newer instrument, just percussionists always seem to look for newer works to play something new, play something fresh. Where some other instruments or instrumentalists kind of get stuck where they only want to play, 18th century or 19th
Mhm.
century. That's kind of their genre of choice. But percussionists always seem to look for something new and to play, or even to have works written for them.
Yeah, and I think that you're right. Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head. Is that we don't have as much repertoire. Like if you think about how much music's been written for the piano or for violin, I always pick on those two because they have the most music. But um, how much repertoire they've had from essentially the Renaissance onward. Like that's hundreds of years of music that they can pull from. So they're not hurting for music to play. But percussionists, we're still looking for kind of like what our great pieces are going to be. We're still trying to figure out like who's our Beethoven and who's our Brahms and our Tchaikovsky. Like who are the people who are going to write our great concerti? And we have pieces that are starting to stick out, but it's only been like I said, maybe the past like 50-ish years that we've really had a lot of music being written for us. So I think that's part of it. And also percussionists tend to just be more, I think, adventurous. I hate to say that. I don't want to judge other musicians, but
No,
I
that's
think
okay. Go ahead.
yeah, I think percussionists are more willing to kind of like say, oh yeah, I can bow that cymbal or I can use a comb on whatever instrument you want to do like kind of wacky or unusual things. Um, so I think it's kind of that combination of things where the people who get assigned to do the strange things in the back of the orchestra, but we're also um, don't have the same body of repertoire that other instruments do.
Great. Well, and I think, and that kind of leads us up to your first piece, "The Spirit in the Dust," which was composed in 2015. Um, so before we ask you just to speak a little about it, just a little note: we recorded these just a little bit earlier due to COVID-related reasons, and just the fact that we don't want to unsettle any of Josh's neighbors this evening. So we'll be bouncing back and forth a little bit. But if you could just speak a little bit before we present "Spirit in the Dust," if you could talk a little bit about it and the composer.
Yeah. So the Spirit in the Dust is by Dinuk Vijayaratne. Dinuk is a Canadian-based composer. He studied at Juilliard and did his doctorate at University of Toronto. Um, And I found this piece for a few reasons. I'm part of a group in Chicago called the Zaffa Collective, and it's a mixed instrumentation new music ensemble that kind of focuses around programming works mainly by underrepresented composers, so specifically women and composers of color. So I've kind of always got my eye out for maybe composers that I haven't heard their music very much, so I try to like look on their website and listen to their music, and so I'm trying to hear those voices who maybe haven't been heard as much in the past. And Dinuk is Sri Lankan, um, so I was really interested in that from the very beginning. He wrote this piece for the Canadian percussionist Beverly Johnston, um, and it was dedicated to her nephew who passed away. So each movement is about, it takes a text or a small line from a poem about death and loss, and kind of meditates on that in a different way. And you'll see that as each of the titles roll through for the movements. But when I heard the piece, I was immediately really taken by it. And I just thought it kind of did a lot of things on the marimba that not a lot of other pieces do. It was really inventive and colorful, and I loved it right away. And I've been playing it a lot the past year, every chance I can. Um, and I've gotten to know Dinuk a little bit. When COVID happened, it makes it the world smaller in a way. So we actually had a Zoom call, and we're talking about him possibly writing a piece for my trio F plus. So, but he's a very very in demand composer. He's like, I really would love to write for you guys, but I have a backlog of about 4 years, so it might be a little while before we get something by him. But we're excited about the possibility.
Well, that's great. That's great always to hear a composer being a living composer being very successful. So that's
Yes.
a double bonus there. So right now, I'd like to introduce the audience to listen to Josh perform the Spirit and the Dust. So we'll come back in a little bit. Okay, welcome back. Thank you for sharing that piece with us. I hope the audience enjoyed it. Um, if you can take a little moment, maybe just to demonstrate the marimba for us. I wanted people to see a piece first and get a kind of idea of what's involved. There's a lot of choreography involved as well in playing it. There's a lot of movement. It's a large geographical area to cover. So if you can just touch upon it, and that'd be great. I'll kind of
Yeah.
mute myself and give the mic to you, so to speak.
So, um, I, I've got the marimba in our living room right now. So, um, normally it lives in, we have a practice room. That's kind of my percussion room. Brought it out here so it's a little bit easier to see. Um, so the marimba's about 8 feet long. So let's see if you can see the whole thing if I turn it a bit. Um, but it's a big instrument, and this is a 5-octave marimba. So the lowest note on this instrument is the same low C as a cello. So so we can still music written for cello, which is great. We play the box cello suites a lot. Um, the nice thing for me is that I'm tall. I'm 6'3", so I have a little bit easier job navigating and reaching the instrument than others do sometimes. There's one spot in a piece that's coming up on the program where I have to reach from what was the lowest note to the highest note. So I'm lucky that I have a pretty big wingspan. So you probably noticed that I was playing with four mallets, which is pretty much the standard for most, you know, solo marimba playing now. A lot of two mallet music where you're just playing with one mallet in each hand was written early on, but almost all music that's written now, or more serious concert music, is written for four mallets, just so there's more possibilities for the composers to do more, and you can essentially create a lot of harmony that way. There's a few different techniques for holding four mallets. The first kind of ways that were developed had the mallets actually crossing, so they would make an X in your hand. So there was a grip that we now call traditional grip, and it's still used by a lot of players. It's still very popular in Japan, especially. But where the mallets cross in the back of your hand like this. Gary Burton, who is a very famous jazz vibraphone player, created his own grip that was also kind of a cross grip, where they just switched which mallet was on top. So we have these grips where the mallets cross, and then the grip I used was originally invented by the old professor at Northwestern, who was named Claire Omar Musser. And then it was kind of adapted by some of his students. And now we generally call it Stevens grip, and it was kind of refined by a guy named Lee Howard Stevens, where the mallets don't touch in your hand. So I'll get a little closer. Where each mallet is kind of independent, so they're not touching each other, and they have a lot more mobility that way. You don't necessarily get as much power because your palm isn't facing down, but you can move the interval, the space between the mallets, much more quickly this way. So you're a little bit more nimble, and I would say that's what the majority of American players play with now, is that grip. So we've got a few different parts of the marimba. We've got the bars, which are made from rosewood, and it's specifically Honduran rosewood from Honduras in Central America. And it's becoming harder and harder to source that wood. They're trying to do it sustainably and with, you know, keeping in mind ways to do it so that they're not depleting the entire rainforest. But they're not effectively finding ways to farm the wood or like grow it outside of nature. So they're trying to figure out ways to sustainably source the wood. Then we have the little tubey guys below the instrument, which we call the resonators. This is the heaviest part of the instrument to move, but they're made of aluminum, and each resonator is tuned to a specific pitch that the bar above it is tuned to. And they amplify the sound. They don't actually make the note ring longer, they act more as kind of an amp and make it louder. So if you have the resonators off, the instrument is much quieter, much quieter. So actually when I have it here, because we live in a 3-flat, I generally keep the resonators off of the instrument because then I'm not bothering my neighbors because it's quite a bit quieter. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say about the instrument. Sal, do you have any questions about the instrument?
I guess I'm trying to think from a student perspective. I guess how I know, but how is it different from, say, the xylophone or
Oh
the
yeah, good
vibraphone
question.
and some other percussion instruments that at first glance may seem that those may be the same thing, but maybe just different size. So maybe just a little bit of their timbral characteristics or construction.
Totally. Yeah, the main difference between all the keyboard percussion instruments is generally what material they're made out of. So for vibraphone and glockenspiel or bells, which might be like what you guys played in elementary school, those are made of metal. The vibraphone is a bigger instrument and it has a pedal like the piano, so it can sustain the notes that it's playing. Um, and the glockenspiel, the bells, are a small instrument that are very high pitched. So the marimba versus the xylophone, they're both made out of rosewood generally, um, but I always say that it's equating like the xylophone is like the violin, and the marimba is like the cello. So the marimba is much lower in pitch. It has a lower range, but it's also mellower in sound. Um, we use different mallets generally on the instruments. So on the marimba, we use softer yarn mallets, which I thought I would show you guys my bag. So this is most of my marimba mallets, not all of them, but that's my marimba bag. But the mallets I have are they're on a birch wood shaft. It's got a core that's usually made out of some kind of rubber or latex material, and then it's wrapped in yarn. So these mallets are pretty warm and they get a pretty mellow sound. And with the xylophone, we use harder plastic mallets, so it's much more of like a brittle sound, um, a little bit more pingy. Um, and I think one thing that always helps people understand the sound too is the first piece for orchestra that used the xylophone was in 1873 by Camille Saint-Saëns, and it was Danse Macabre. And it's basically like a Halloween piece. And the xylophone was supposed to sound like a skeleton dancing, essentially. So it kind of has that kind of quality, if you can think of it that way.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Um, I guess it's time. Let's listen to another piece. So if you want to introduce us to the Lute Suite in E minor, which, as we discussed before, by Johann Sebastian Bach, was obviously not written with for marimba or percussion piece at all. So if you want to speak a little bit about it and the transcription in general of it.
Yeah, so um, uh, we tend to borrow some pieces from the past. Like I said, we like to play a lot of new music, but it's still nice to take other instrument that was written or music that was written for other instruments in the past and play it on our instrument. So I for one of my favorite composers, maybe my favorite composer is Johann Sebastian Bach, um, and so I've played music that he wrote for cello, music that he's written for violin, and this is a piece that he wrote for lute. And again, our Music 110 students should know what a lute is, but for those that were sleeping that day, the lute is kind of like the precursor to the guitar. So it has like a round body instead of the pear-shaped body of the guitar, and it has a slightly different sound. So this was kind of like the guitar equivalent of the Baroque era. Um, and Bach wrote several suites for lute. Um, so sometimes there's questions about like, is it okay to take music that was written for one instrument and adopt it or adapt it for another? Um, and my response to that, especially for Bach's music, is that he did that all the time. If we look at like the third lute suite, it's actually just the fifth cello suite but adding some notes in. So he changed the key and he added some bass notes, and it's the same thing as the fifth cello suite. So Bach would do this all the time. He'd recycle his own music and try it on different instruments. Um, so I think we have a little bit of leeway in doing that ourselves, and it allows us to kind of explore, music not just of today, but kind of the past, and to kind of feel like we're able to play more styles than just what's written right now as well. So this is the Allemande, which is the like more stately. Allemande means German in French, so it's a German Baroque dance, and it feels kind of stately and almost not austere, but kind of march-like in a way. Um, I didn't really have to do much to adapt it. Um, Lute music and guitar music fits very well on the marimba, and we don't have to do much to change it to make it work.
Okay, thank you again for sharing that with us. Um, so it certainly adapts well for the instrument, and the counterpoint comes through. And I agree with you. I think the legacy of composers is their adaptability, and certainly, I'm sure if the marimba was around, Bach would have certainly written
I
something
hope
for it.
so.
He wouldn't
Yeah.
have said, "Oh, forget that thing. What is that?" So um, let's let's move on and let's talk about another newer piece written in 1985, which sounds like 35 years ago, but in musically speaking, that's a relatively new piece in our world.
Right.
So if you want to talk a little bit about Andrew Thomas's Merlin.
Yeah, so this is a real like war horse for the instrument. It's one of the pieces that kind of elevated what was expected of marimba players. Like there were a few pieces that were written about that time span, like 85 to 95, that really kept upping the game of what was the technical requirement of marimba players. So this piece is in two movements, and it takes its title from a poem by William Arlington Robinson. Um, and the first movement is all it's all chorale, and it's really ruled and kind of has this sense of foreboding and doom. And then the second movement is called Time's Way and is very technical and challenging. Um, and it kind of plays with the audience's expectations about um, where the pulse is and where the beat is, and I think he does that in a really great way. um, this is just as a personal note for me, this is a piece that one of the first recordings I really fell in love with was a marimba player named Nancy Zeltzman recorded this piece, and I was like, oh, I love this piece so much. And I thought, oh, I'm going to play this for my senior recital when I was in college. And then one of the guys who was in the studio with me in the percussion studio in my college was playing it for his recital. I'm like, well, I'm going to do a different piece then. Um, and so this actually became like kind of a COVID project of mine. I'm like, well, I've always wanted to play this piece, and it takes a long time to learn it. So I have time right now. so I'll do that. So this has been something I've been working on since we've been kind of locked down. It's been a lot of fun to learn it, and I'm glad I get to share it today.
Yes, I guess, I mean, there is some silver linings that we have time to go back to those projects we always wish that we had a little bit
Yes.
more time for. I know I've certainly been able to catch up on a few things as well. So let's listen to Merlin by Andrew Thomas, performed by Josh Graham. So thank you again for sharing that. It was great. Before we move on, if you can just maybe speak to the audience real quick, just, what is kind of what's your practice regimen or routine when you're taking on, a larger piece, a demanding piece, something like that.
Yeah. It's lots of slow practice. And when you have the luxury of time, just being able to take small sections and say, I'm going to learn two measures today, and they're going to be drastically under tempo, but I'm going to learn them correctly. And the speed, this is what I always talk about with my students too, is speed is easy to add if you learn something correctly. So especially when I'm learning something really demanding, and um, even if I don't have a lot of time, I still try to do it that way, where it's like I'm starting it very slow, and then making sure I'm learning it the right way, and then ratcheting up the tempo.
That's a good lesson for all. Um, I'm going to do a quick plug. Just, Josh he teaches at Triton. He teaches private lessons, even though we're remote. He's still teaching virtual. All of our wonderful faculty are. So if you've ever thought about taking an instrument, we're here. We're open. Spring registration's open. So by all means, we have great faculty to study music with by far. I'd like to introduce everyone now to Christina Graham, who you might have noticed has joined us. Um, so they've also worked on a piece together. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that too, because we have another transcription of a piece by Ray Vaughan Williams. And I don't know if are there any pieces that exist in the literature of English horn and marimba, or is
Well,
it?
there's definitely one because we commissioned one by a friend of ours. His name's Aaron Holloway Nahum, and he lives in London. And he wrote a piece for us. And actually, my last faculty recital 2 years ago, we did that piece. And it's very contemporary, pretty avant-garde. Our parts do not like line up. They're meant to just be completely kind of separate. Um, and we always said it was kind of like an allegory for marriage because you're trying to figure out how to make fit two parts together that are just completely different. So, um, so we had fun with that, but we also have done Esther Piazzolla's Libertango, and she just played her normal oboe part, and I adapted the piano part for marimba. It's difficult because there's certain like guitar music, lute music, those can be adapted quite easily for marimba, but piano music, it just has too many notes. You know, when you get going from 10 fingers to four, it's much more challenging to cover that amount of music when you're taking piano music and trying to play it on the marimba. So um, it, there's a few other pieces that are for um, percussion and oboe or English horn, but not very many. So we came across this piece at the library, um, and it was originally for cello, but it had versions for I think like euphonium and English horn, a whole bunch of different versions, and we're like, oh, this could really work. And through the magic of um, uh, being able to do record a little bit beforehand, I recorded the right hand with Christina, and then we layered the left hand on top of it um, to kind of make that work with to have the full part accompanying it.
Great. And just lost my train of thought. At any rate, for this particular piece, so you transcribed this yourself then? So this was just kind of something you listened to, thought, hey, this would be something we would like to perform, and set out to it. When you're composing for marimba, as far as timbre, I guess decays are different all over the place,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're up high, down low. What are some other things that maybe someone wouldn't think about when you have to transcribe for marimba, say from a piano, which has a much longer decay, or any other instrument?
Yeah, so there's certain things like certain spots in here in the piece where the piano just holds a chord, and if I did that, it would be gone, like that. Um, So I do roll spots like that just to give it at least the illusion of sustain. Um, and that I think that's the biggest challenge, other than just the amount of notes that I can cover in one hand is much less than a pianist can. Um, it just trying to adapt a full piano part doesn't always work. So splitting up the hands like this made it a lot more practical. So the you want to speak about like trying to record this with Ellie? So we have
sure.
a well 16-month-old daughter.
Yes.
She makes
That
a
was
cameo.
definitely interesting. Yes, she
Yeah.
does. Yeah, no, I mean, it was tricky because under normal circumstances, we could have just, had a friend or Josh's mom come into town or something and like, can you just watch her and we'll go, record this for a couple hours. But we had maybe, chunks of 10 minutes to get like a good run of it before she would start yelling in the background. Or like I had to carry her for one of the movements. She's on my back, and then she started like bouncing around, which I couldn't really play very well when she was bouncing. So we had to get creative and
I did not actually notice that she was on your back until the second time, so
oh yeah.
it was flawless.
Yep. So it was an interesting process for sure.
I don't know if fun is the right word.
No,
it was
it was a little stressful.
It was yeah, it was interesting for sure. I mean, it was fun that she was involved in it, but it was it's one of those things with parenthood that's a little bit more challenging than before. So
Right, and definitely with COVID, I mean, that's just one of the realities. We're not going to risk, someone getting sick
Right.
just so that we can record. We adapt, and that's what we're doing, and that's the whole point of this series as well. Is just we still want music to continue. We still want to hear performances, and that's why I'm very grateful that you both agreed to do this. And so let's listen to it, and then we'll talk a little bit more on the other end. So this is Ray Vaughan Williams' Six Studies in English Folk Song, and we're going to listen to the Adagio movement, the Andante, the Larghetto, and then the Allegro vivace. Thank you again for sharing. It was very nice, and it was nice to hear Christina play as well. Um, as far as music goes, I know Josh, you're from Michigan. Am I correct?
Yeah,
So
we're
what?
both from Michigan.
You're both from Michigan. So what brought you to the Chicagoland area?
Um, well, I started my doctorate at Northwestern about 5 years ago. I did a year there and had some difficulties with my advisor and decided like it wasn't the right fit for me. But really being in Chicago has been um, kind of a boon for me as a musician. I feel like there's been a lot of performing and teaching opportunities that I'm from originally around Detroit, and there's a lot going on around there, but Chicago is just has a level of vibrancy musically that I don't think a lot of other places have. So it's been really wonderful to be here and to be able to kind of grow a career um, with all the opportunities that have been here for me.
And Christina, so there was some weird echo there. Christina, well, obviously before COVID, are you performing in any ensembles, or what are your what are your main interests in terms of? Do you have a particular genre or style, or that you like that you always seem to fall back on or go to?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Um, well, after doing my master's degree, I kind of have taken a step back from playing a bit. And then when Ellie came along, it's been definitely even more difficult. So I haven't done a ton of playing. I kind of have turned a bit more toward baking and like cake decorating, which is totally different.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it's just it's been an interesting road. It hasn't been a straight path for me with music stuff. So
Oh,
I
well,
think
I
that's
get it. I was a real estate appraiser for 3 years,
yeah,
so I get it. It's we usually end up back there, but
yep,
it's certainly life sometimes dictates which direction we'll head before we make our way back. So,
yeah.
um,
Definitely
but
grateful for
but
this.
but our experience is definitely we hang on to them and then bring them into our music. So it's by no means I don't feel a pause or anything. We just have different life experiences, which we reflect in what we do. So
Absolutely.
um, I would like to take this time to open it up. We have a couple minutes left, maybe 10, 15 minutes. If there's any questions from anybody, feel free to type them into there's a Q&A section on the bottom. And if you type in your questions, I'd be happy to relate them to either Josh, Christina, or both. I also have the chat too. Um, One question is just, and it's a common theme that I get with most of the recitals, is just as musicians, obviously, you're performers, you're out and about, you're used to being around people, you're performing, in closed spaces with lots of people. Um, how are, fortunately, we have teaching to do, but how are you impacted just doing, just your emotional well-being, financially, not to get into the details, but just, everything is affected maybe more so for a performing musician than say someone who has an office job and can just kind of dial it in from home, thankfully.
Yeah. We've been really fortunate that we've both kept the vast majority of our teaching. Um, and some of I still had a few gigs, a few performances, like very much fewer and farther between than normal. Um, but there was a, a series at a cathedral in Milwaukee that I was supposed to play on in May, and they ended up pushing that concert to September. Um, and by that time, they had kind of figured out um, it's an enormous space. They had to kind of figure out how to socially distance people and make sure everyone was wearing masks. And I was maybe 200 feet away from the closest audience member, so that kind of space allowed for an actual in-person performance. I've had one live streamed performance where the performance was live, and then was they had a number of cameras, and it was actually a duo recital with an organist, um, and that was in Fourth Presbyterian Church downtown Chicago. Um, and I know a lot of my friends are doing things like this with their universities or where they teach or with their groups. I really miss playing with the chamber groups that I play with, and playing with my wife has been wonderful. Uh, but yeah, I just miss those opportunities to be uh, like playing with my violin, clarinet, percussion trio. It, I miss that interaction, and I miss being able to kind of keep moving things forward. It feels kind of like things are stuck in the mud, but I'm just thankful we're all healthy um, and we're able to look towards what's next and anticipate it and just hope for what's coming.
Have you tried? I mean, whoever would figure it out would be probably the next billionaire. But as far as just with the latency issues, that's one of the biggest obstacles to live recording and performing maybe in an ensemble um, with multiple people. Where if we were to have like a recital with one person at home, another person there,
Right.
have you tried it at all, or even just to have like just kind of a practice session with someone? Did it?
Not live like that. I've had some stuff where we've done pre-recorded, things and just kind of smash them together. I think that's as close as you can get right now, because unfortunately, trying to rehearse like that would be, I don't think it would be horribly encouraging to anybody. So
And just in general, how are lessons going? Just how is the dynamic? I would think that the students probably appreciate that they can at least keep going, because as you know,
yeah,
or as anyone would know, if it's not like riding a bike. If you stop practicing your instrument, which I can attest to, that it's not like you just pick up where you left off. You're going to lose a lot of ground. So how's it been
yeah,
with your students?
it's it's been going surprisingly well, honestly. I feel like it's you know especially I think the younger students, like I teach some high schoolers and I teach the students at Triton. I think um, all those students have been adapting well. They're very adaptable, and um, I've seen some students just really thrive in this time. Honestly, like they're really kind of growing by leaps and bounds, and I think everybody's a little different in how they can process it and deal with it. But overall, I think it's been surprisingly positive.
Right. And someone asked regarding Christina, have you taught in the past? What did you think of? Did you have your own private studio or private lessons yourself? And you know, did you enjoy the experience? How did you like it, and so forth?
Yeah, no, I started teaching private oboe lessons back when I was in high school, just to younger students. I had lots of opportunities in high school to go to my to the local middle school and help out there and teach all of that. I have an ed degree too, so I have quite a bit of teaching experience in big groups and private lessons. And I've always really enjoyed teaching. I've always felt pretty natural at that. I love working with kids and sharing music with them and seeing them grow. That's always been a really cool thing for me to see. So yeah, during this time for me, I have a couple of piano students that I'm teaching right now, and they've been very resilient, just like Josh was saying about his students. So it's just been a very cool experience. Um, just since I started teaching, just yeah, I love watching kids grow. So it's a cool thing.
Yes, and again, just the fact that you and Josh and the other instructors can be there for them, because honestly, what else are we doing, right? What are other people with their time? So if you can turn it into something positive, like making music and becoming better at your instrument, uh, even if it's a hobby or a novice or just amateur, but just to be able to take that away from you and have something positive come out of this, I think is a very powerful thing. So,
Oh,
You're muted.
you got muted, Sal.
a lot of a lot of positive feedback. Um, Someone wants to know what Ellie's favorite instrument is.
She likes to bang on our piano.
She does.
Um,
When I was pregnant with her,
oh yeah.
the biggest reaction that I got, like with her kicking, was during a performance.
2 concerts, right?
There were 2 separate things. Yes, there was one concert where there was a soprano singing, and it was a pretty intense performance, and she was going absolutely crazy.
Ellie, not the soprano.
Yeah, Ellie was. And then the other one was
we were doing a piece by an American composer named George Crumb, and it was a piece for 2 pianos and percussion. And there's one movement where the percussionists go inside the pianos, and we have slide whistles and are playing melodies on the slide whistles.
Yeah. So she reacted to the slide whistles pretty intensely also.
Yeah.
But on the outside, what would you say? She really likes to like steal your mallets and hit your drums.
Yes.
She really likes that a lot.
So I'm afraid she's gonna become a drummer. But there are worse things, I guess. So, but yeah, she's been very. Since we've had the marimba in the living room for the past few days for the recording, and then to leave, we just didn't want to move it after we did the recording. She's been grabbing the mallets when she can and trying to get to the instrument, and so it's fun.
Well, given that you're both musicians, it's probably inevitable that she will pick up something. So.
She's also shown that she might possibly become a conductor.
Yeah,
that's kind of her natural.
She likes to. So she's just waving her arms. Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't want to keep you both any more time. It's been really great. It's a good way to end this recital series for the year. I just want to take a minute to thank President Mary Rita Moore, Vice President Dr. Susan Campos, the Dean of Arts and Sciences Kevin Lee, Dean of College Readiness Ricardo Segovia, and our VPC Department Chairperson Dennis McNamara for their support in implementing this virtual series. Thank you all for attending. This is our last recital for the year. We will be announcing our spring season very soon. Please check Triton's social media page for our schedule. Spring registration is open, Triton, so Josh will continue to offer virtual lessons in the spring, so be sure to register if interested. If you have any questions, just check Triton website. Feel free to contact me. I hope everybody has a happy and safe holiday season, and I will hope to see you all next year. Take care.